well, while we get the slides up, I can just, with respect to time, I'll just go ahead and get started. Sounds like there's a little bit of an echo now, but okay. I would just like to thank the MPRIN investigators and the team for, allowing me to speak today. For those who are not familiar with who I am, I'm Leslie Samity Bates. I'm a program officer with the Obstetric and Pediatric Pharmacology and Therapeutics branch at the Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. We often say OPPTB at NICHD. More specifically, I am the program officer for the KRCC component of the MPRIN Hub. And what makes me, I guess, uniquely positioned for this is that I am also the program officer for our T32 Pediatric Clinical Pharmacology training program. As a previous T32 fellow turned program officer, I'm really excited for this session. A major component of my grant portfolio is really training and career development. And I think without this sort of guidance, I wouldn't be here today. Just a brief disclaimer, I see that we have quite a bit of participants still on board, so thank you for sticking around. I will say that this session is really geared for trainees and early stage investigators, but I welcome any advice that established investigators have to prompt this discussion. Next slide, please. So I want to just introduce our panelists for today. We have Dr. Fagali and Dr. Jayachandran. Dr. Fagali is an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh, and Dr. Jayachandran is a pharmacometrician at Pfizer. Dr. Fagali will be giving the sort of academic perspective, also having been an obstetrics fellow, and then Dr. Jayachandran will be providing the industry perspective, also having been a T32 clinical pharmacology fellow. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves later on in this session, so please don't take my sort of brief introduction as any reflection of their contribution. We are super fortunate to have them both here today. So a little bit of how this will work. I will give a sort of 10 to 15 minute formal presentation, and then this will be followed by sort of our career story, our testimony, and this will be provided by each of the panelists, and then we'll conclude with a 15-minute Q&A. I hope that this session is beneficial to the trainees, so please feel free to ask any and all questions during this Q&A session. There's really no limitations. While I'm giving sort of a formal presentation, this is an absolutely informal discussion, and it's meant to be super beneficial to you all. So next slide. So I wanted to begin with this slide because there are so many possibilities for your career. Clinician scientists work in a variety of academic and industry and government settings. I think those three being the most common, but there's so many different avenues you can pursue. Sometimes it's difficult to really put a label on it because we don't know what we don't know, right? So developing your career goals is not only about sort of finding that position or that distinction, but it's really about understanding what you want to pursue and what your personal goals are for yourself. So I think it's really important to know that this stage is more about career exploration, and it's absolutely essential. It really provides the opportunity to explore what your interests are, sort of learn about potential careers, learn how to gain job experience, and find out any additional information you may need. This sort of sounds strange talking about this at this point. You would think, oh, as a postdoc, you should really know where you're moving to next. But personally, I had an idea of what I thought I wanted to do and completely went in a different direction, and that's okay. So clinical pharmacology, clinical research is always evolving. So it's really no surprise that job opportunities are expanding and evolving as well. So if you had an idea of something or a career direction you wanted to pursue and you happen to change it, know that that's okay. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to maybe start with some of the most common careers I think are available for clinician scientists. In the academic setting, we often see clinician science move towards the sort of professorship route. Professors are expected to be outstanding teachers, outstanding researchers, have a demonstrated skill in research mentorship, have a demonstrated excellent teaching skills in didactic seminars, with clinical trainees. Their role is also can be as an attending, as a clinical supervisor, perhaps to individuals or small groups. Some other examples are lecturers, research associates, even laboratory technicians. What I find is that individuals are kind of looking for sort of career paths that works with their personal everyday life. So if they, I wouldn't say take a step back, but if they sort of move towards like the laboratory technician route, it's often because there's a flexibility in the schedule, or it allows them to be behind the bench more if that's something that the individual wants to pursue. So know that also is an option. It may not be the end goal, but it is a career route. In terms of industry, we often see R&D scientists, clinical research coordinators, sales rep, drug safety associates, clinical research coordinators, I think typically work under the direction of sort of a principal investigator, and they're in charge of designing and conducting and managing the clinical trial for a high level. I think this is a great position for someone who wants to oversee sort of multiple trials and not just run, their own. Next, we have the sort of the healthcare sector, and I think this is really important for trainees who may have a clinical degree. So they may work sort of in a hospital and maybe an inpatient setting, or in a clinical outpatient setting as well. I think, and feel free to chime in. I feel like a lot of our MDs have more of the physician role when they work in this healthcare settings. Even PharmDs have more of that pharmacist role in this setting. So I think it's still an avenue for clinician scientists to pursue. I just think sort of the focus or the focus shifts a little bit from research to more of the clinic. The government sector includes things like scientists and researchers. We even see environmental monitors, drug safety monitors, risk assessment specialists. At the FDA, we see that there's regulatory compliance officers that sort of focus on poor or unsafe and ineffective drugs, and they address these concerns through compliance strategies and risk-based enforcement actions. I actually have a colleague who moved directly from pharmacy school into this position because that's sort of what her focus was. She wanted to be more in the development of policy and compliance strategies, and actually going that pharmacist route. This type of position helps to really address patient care still. They address patient health risks that arise from potential violations in FDA regulations and laws. I also wanted to make mention some other maybe less well-known but still common career paths, like medical and scientific writers and editors, as well as consultants. For those that may not be familiar, medical and scientific writers, they can write about a variety of things, clinical trials, new drugs, maybe documents for pharmaceutical industry, medical education brochures. You'll often find clinician scientists behind those brochures that we often see. Let me give you an example. A medical company may pay a medical writer to write instructions for a new drug system or device, right? Just understand that this sort of position requires an understanding of the medical concepts and terminology. You also have to be well aware of the relevant guidelines, have to be confident in being able to review and search medical literature and understanding and presenting research data. So I thought this was, absolutely an interesting example of a job, and know that there's actually quite a demand for medical writers. I think it's a niche that only a few individuals can sort of fill this. Next slide, please. So the next thing I wanted to do was talk a little bit more about maybe alternative careers for clinician scientists. So I'm thinking beyond the lab, beyond the bench. And you may see some of the career options listed, also previously listed on the other slide, but I thought it was worth mentioning here, just in sort of a different aspect. So, if you gain, these career paths, I feel like are for those who want to use, a different set of skills outside of the lab. So, I mentioned medical science liaisons. These come from a variety of background. They do have scientific and clinical training. MSLs, help to establish, maintain, and influence sort of this peer-to-peer relationship, whether it's with physicians or, with other members of the clinical team. They are referred to as sort of these key opinion leaders at academic and health institutions, and they really work on behalf of, the pharmaceutical company or the medical company. I will be honest, medical liaisons really are personable people. So if you do not like working with others, or you just are a little bit standoffish, this may not be the career route for you. But if you enjoy working with people and just interfacing with different individuals at any given point, I think this is a really interesting career route. We have medical science writers, like I mentioned. I put this here again because it is beyond the lab. This bullet point may refer to actually like book writing. I have another colleague who sort of went the PharmD Deity route. So she writes medical law or an influence in medical policy. So that's really interesting career that she never thought was possible until she was introduced to the option. We have biotechnology, sales and marketing, project management. Another big booming one is healthcare informatics technology. Let me give you an example. You may have a chief medical information officer, and this is a person that is responsible for overseeing maybe all of the organization's initiatives. These are related to health informatics and patient records. They can be involved in special projects, sort of software launches and new process developments. And I think this is really, really important for clinicians to be involved in this, because you know what you're looking at when it comes to EHRs, right? Kind of what works and what doesn't work. So for you to have, firsthand experience with this and influence how the informatics technology moves, I think is really, really important. Excuse me. Another option is biomanufacturing. An individual in this sort of sector can participate in early phase development of perhaps preclinical and clinical stage therapy products. I believe in this sort of role, you probably are just primarily responsible for overseeing operations and involved in overseeing quality test controlling and that sort of thing. Next slide, please. I'm realizing that I'm pushing time, so I'm just going to try to move a little bit more quickly, but we have quality control and assurance. We have regulatory affairs, like I previously mentioned. We have teaching opportunities, and then government jobs at the NIH, for example, being a program officer. And then, FDA employs scientists in a variety of fields and discipline. And again, this could be outside of the bench, maybe more of a policy-based role in scientific policies. These could just be ethical clinical trial policies. There's quite interesting, there's some really unique positions at the CIA where clinician scientists serve in a consulting environment, and they elicit client needs in designing, conducting, and employing applied research. So just know that while it may not seem like the CIA or the DoD needs clinician scientists, they actually do have a lot of interesting positions available. Next slide, please. So I think that for me, the key thing is questions to ask yourself. And this helps you to sort of determine where you may best fit. So what kind of work do you want to do? What do you want to learn? Do you enjoy working behind the bench? This could be wet lab or dry lab. And when I say wet lab and dry lab, for those who are familiar, this may be, the actual pipetting, the actual working with biospecimens, or a dry lab where you're behind a computer and doing analysis. Do you enjoy learning? Is there something you want to avoid doing? I have some mentors that absolutely hate bodily fluids. So they refuse to do sort of immunizations, and that's okay, right? You have to realize what might be your strengths and weaknesses. Another question is, do you prefer autonomy? Can you work well by yourself without sort of much direction? Next slide, please. Another question to think about is, again, what area do you want to work in? And this is, I think, is also important to recognize that academia, pharma, government, nonprofit, they all have sort of different time requirements. So keep that in mind when you're looking for a job. Do you want the flexibility, or do you like having the stringent work constraints? Do you want stability and security, or are you comfortable with the changing and the moving often? Can you handle stress or competitive pressure? Next slide, please. And then the last thing is kind of like, what do you have to offer in terms of expertise and skills and ability? You may want a specific position, but you may not be well suited for it. And that's okay. Why I'm saying to ask yourself this question is, maybe you need to sort of find out how to fill your deficits, right? So what unique abilities do you bring to the position, and where are your deficits? How do you plan to overcome them if you really want to pursue a specific career route? Next slide, please. So I just have an sort of maybe like a little plan of how you start this, whether you're in your first year of your fellowship, your last year of your fellowship, an early stage investigator looking to make a change. Explore all your career options and decide what you want to pursue. But please, please, please look at everything. Keep your mind open. Build the skills and network needed for career advancement. The biggest thing I say is talk to people, ask them what they do, and if they enjoy doing it, right? And then once you figure out, oh, you know what, this may be interesting, ask them how they got there. I think it's really helpful to see if maybe you're on the right path by asking someone who's already done it. What do we always say? Don't recreate the wheel, right? And that the other thing I think is absolutely necessary is identifying and securing the right postdoctoral position, because your postdoc helps you to build the necessary skills and provide the tools you need to move on in your career. Select a mentor that has your best interest in mind, meaning you discuss exactly what you want to do, exactly what you want to learn, and make sure that they're willing to guide you and push you. I was fortunate enough to have a PI that allowed me to really do everything that I wanted to pursue. I wanted to be involved in grant writing. I wanted to be involved in public speaking, and really push me and put me in sort of the places that I needed to be in. And then also just kind of plan for your future career advancement. Take every opportunity you can for future career advancement, even no matter how big or small the opportunity is. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to share with you a little bit about my path, because I think it's an interesting one. But I will try to keep it brief, because I really want to allow for our question and answer session. So I completed a dual degree. Oh, I do apologize. I have some workers here in my house. So if you cannot hear me, please let me know and I will be sure to speak up. So I completed a dual degree PharmD PhD program at Mercer University in Atlanta. I knew that I always wanted to be involved in scientific research, but it was also important for me to have the clinical experience, hence the dual program. So after graduation, I pursued a postdoctoral fellowship at UCSF, and this was sponsored by NICHD. It was a T32 fellowship in Pediatric Clinical Pharmacology. Why did I move directly into the fellowship? While I had a great education from Mercer, I felt that there was something lacking. I felt it, and more so in sort of my training, I felt like I wasn't I wasn't at a point where I could be as an independent researcher, and I knew I needed something to bridge that. And that's where the fellowship came into place. And I was really bent on filling, like I mentioned previously, really bent on filling the deficits and acquiring the necessary tools I needed to become an independent researcher. You know, I loved the bench, was super confident that I wanted to pursue the academic route, so much so that I taught while I was in my fellowship. I mentored while I was in my fellowship, you know, but I was really unsure once I got into, you know, my second year, if this was a route for me. I was fortunate enough to have pretty regular involvement with my program officer for 2 of the grants that I happened to be involved with. So I honestly just reached out to her and I said, you know, can I have, you know, 15 minutes of your time for me to talk about your career trajectory and your job? And if after 20 years, I wanted to know if she still loved it. And talking with her pretty much sealed the deal. What I was looking for was something where I could have influence and reach. Loved working on my projects. You know, I had maybe 2 or 3 projects, but the thought of being involved in 50, 60 projects, for me, that was kind of like, that was the goal, you know. I really wanted just to be involved in all aspects of clinical pharmacology and science, and I loved learning, and I loved I was interested, excuse me, in other works, and I was also interested in seeing how these works could sort of intersect. And I don't think I would have been able to do that with just focusing on my own research. And please, my story is not to discredit or minimize the work of all you amazing PIs and researchers, but I realized that it wasn't what I needed for myself. You know, so I will say that the caveat is that I'm technically not involved in the research, which is kind of hard sometimes, but I'm still proud of my ability to sort of shepherd or guide the science. For those who aren't familiar with sort of the role of a program officer, they're super critical in the foundation of science as they oversee program development. We seek out and review grants and proposals. We oversee budgets. We manage projects. Again, really big in sort of shepherding the science. You know, we ensure that organizations, activities, and programs really align with our foundation and nonprofit goals and our mission and the mission statement. So I'm really proud of my own personal journey, and I am open to any questions during the Q&A session. I will sort of move on to our last 2 slides to give our panelists an opportunity to speak. If you move to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to leave you with some take-home points that I mentioned here, but again, I just wanted to highlight. So really consider a postdoctoral position that best prepares you for your future career goals. If you know that you want to go or you're considering a role in industry, make sure that the postdoc position gives you industry experience, right? Really obtain transferable skills in any of your career paths. I think these are really necessary. Writing and communication skills, key. Time and project management skills, people management and teamwork experience are absolutely necessary. One thing I try to tell my mentors is to build a strong mentor team. I can provide maybe the professional mentorship, but maybe you need a clinical mentor. Maybe you need a personal mentor as well. So building a mentor team is absolutely necessary. I say start your career options early. And I have here in big bold letters, network. So whenever you go to these conferences, or even if you're having these coffee chats like you did this morning, network. You never know who you will meet and who will help you to advance your career. You'll be very surprised. I met someone as a first-year pharmacy student, and several years later, they end up being a collaborator on a grant. So, you know, please network. Next slide, please. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight for you, a job doesn't have to be for life. You know, make the decision if you realize that, you know what, after 5 years, this wasn't necessarily what I thought it was going to be. It's okay to change. You know, it's okay to reevaluate what you want to do. You know, just make sure you're doing this early on, and make sure you're not sort of making any rash decisions. Really think about what you're trying to pursue, so you're not having to jump. But I just want you to realize that this is not sort of like the end all be all once you move into a particular job. Next slide. So I will move on to our panelists and provide them with the opportunity to share, their story with you. Let's go ahead and start with Dr. Fagali, if you wouldn't mind coming on camera and beginning, and then we'll follow up with Dr. Jayachandran.
Hi, good morning. And
good morning.
Thank you for the invitation to be a part of the panel and to talk about my experience. I could potentially take a couple of minutes just to talk about my professional journey and hopefully leave enough time for questions. And so I came to the clinic kind of pregnancy pharmacology and perinatal pharmacology by way of training in the obstetrics and gynecology residency and being interested in treatment of diabetes in pregnancy, and recognizing that kind of traditional clinical research in this setting had some limitations from the point of view of understanding treatment response. And I sought a clinical fellowship in maternal fetal medicine, which focuses on high-risk pregnancy care. At the time, there were 5 sites that were part of the Obstetric Pharmacology Research Unit, the OPRU, which was supported by the NIH, and ended up at the University of Pittsburgh by way of trying to set myself up to have mentors available that focused on the topic that was of interest to me. And that's where I met with Steve Karitis and Raman Venkatamaran, who had been longtime collaborators and were co-PI on the OPRU site at Pittsburgh, and had a long-standing relationship of looking at perinatal pharmacology, at the time mostly focused on preterm labor and preterm labor prevention, but thought of them as being a way to gain the expertise to then refocus on my content interest of diabetes in pregnancy. And so at the time of my clinical fellowship training, there was a T32 in obstetric pharmacology that they were also able to acquire, located here at Pittsburgh. And I was able to enroll as one of the T32 fellows and completed that partly within the 3rd year of my clinical fellowship that was mostly focused on research, and was able to spend time and effort expanding my knowledge of pharmacologic modeling and kind of PBPK and technologies that were outside the clinical space and that I did not have firsthand educational experience with, to be able to better design studies and a research program that was in line with more state-of-the-art pharmacologic methodology, and use data from my T32 to then submit for an internal KL2 award from the University of Pittsburgh CTSI, and then from there a K23 that is sponsored by NICHD, that is again all focused on diabetes in pregnancy, but trying to slowly but surely build a program of marrying kind of clinical care with clinical pharmacology to be able to better understand ways of tailoring treatment and individualizing treatment in this patient population.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Dr. Fagali, will you stay on to answer some questions in the session? Perfect. Wonderful. Okay, Dr. Jayachandran, this is your show.
Thank you so much for inviting me to participate as a panelist here at the MPRINT meeting. I'm really delighted to be here and to speak with you all about career paths and opportunities in pharmacology, especially as they relate to maternal and child health and development. I'll begin by introducing myself and present my career path, and then I'll share some reflections on my experiences. And I'll try to do it in about 5 minutes so we can leave time for questions. At the moment, I'm an early career scientist working as a pharmacometrician in the Global Pharmacometrics Group at Pfizer. And in my role, I perform modeling and simulations analyses to support the development of new medicines in the therapeutic area of rare diseases. And as a global pharmacometrics lead, I support programs that include developing therapies for diseases that specifically manifest in the pediatric population. And I'm also involved in the design of adolescent and pediatric clinical trials to support pediatric indications, and I perform the modeling and simulations activities to design these trials. To get here, I acquired a variety of professional, technical, and soft skills across a number of years. My educational training included undergraduate and graduate degrees in chemical engineering and a doctoral degree in pharmacy with a focus in the pharmaceutical sciences, specifically clinical pharmacology. And then my postgraduate training was in clinical pharmacology and pharmacometrics. So during my postgraduate training as an NIH T32 clinical pharmacology and therapeutics fellow, I developed population pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic models for antiretroviral agents for the development of pre-exposure prophylaxis formulations for HIV prevention, as well as antimycobacterial agents for tuberculosis prevention in pregnant women. And the latter experience was in partnership with the Impact Network. And the knowledge that I acquired across that work has really been instrumental for me in my present role. And when I reflect on my experiences to date, a few points come to mind, and I'll share them with the group here today. The first point is around the decision to enter the pharmaceutical industry after completing my postgraduate training. I made this decision based on my own interests to apply the pharmacometrics knowledge that I gained in the context of drug development questions as they're defined by the pharmaceutical industry. I wanted the opportunity to work on multidisciplinary teams like statistics, biopharmaceutics, epidemiology, clinical operations, and many others, in order to learn how these different functional lines work together to be able to answer pertinent drug development questions, specifically at very fast paces. And across the past few years, I have received a bird's eye view as well as a field level view of exactly this. I've learned the value specifically of communicating very clearly and effectively. And I've had that opportunity to apply everything that I've learned many times over across different programs. The second point that comes to mind for me is around applying to and accepting opportunities outside of one's comfort range. This is a point that I want to specifically target around leadership opportunities. Early in my postgraduate training, I was offered the chance to join a steering committee for a community within the American Society of Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics. And after some consideration, I accepted the opportunity, but I didn't realize at the time that that would end up leading to other chairship roles and now an editor in training role in the ASCPT family of journals. And so saying yes to just a single opportunity really allowed me to drastically widen my professional network and gave me new learning opportunities and allowed me to forge new working partnerships, and it's given me a platform really for visibility and leadership as an early career scientist. And the last point I want to make is regarding emphasizing the value of conducting micro interviews to learn what opportunities exist for oneself. When I first entered the field of clinical pharmacology, I interviewed so many different individuals at all different professional levels to learn about their career paths. And this allowed me to compare and contrast their paths to mine and to broaden my own network of connections. And as Leslie Ann just pointed out, today I still remain connected to many of those individuals that I interviewed, and some of them have even become close friends and mentors. And I've even been given the opportunity to pay it forward by mentoring their interns and fellows. So I'll end here, and I welcome your questions and comments.
Thank you so much. So I had a poll going in our Whova chat, and I'll refer to the poll in a little bit. But what we're going to do is just open up the floor to any questions. Please feel free to come on camera, or if you don't want to come on camera, feel free to put it in the chat. As we wait on some questions to sort of populate, I have a question for you both. Maybe just talk about what challenges you found in sort of trying to navigate your career path.
Yeah, I think for me, it was learning a whole new language. I mean, even though pharmacology and medicine are both within the healthcare sciences, the way you think about things and the way that you engage with research questions is completely different. And I recall going to the ASCPT for the first time as a clinical fellow and not knowing anyone and not being familiar with a lot of terminology, and focusing on staying calm within that uncomfortable space and trying to gain as much knowledge and absorb things as much as possible, and being very transparent about things being mostly an interest to start off with a desire to learn and to build on that interest in the hopes of being able to gain experience and being able to then have a return on that investment. And sitting with that discomfort within those early meetings and sitting with the discomfort during the courses in pharmacology that I was taking was not the most comfortable thing, but it led to a much better and richer understanding of the material, and hopefully to be able to use it in a much more meaningful way.
I entirely echo that. And I'll add that for me, what was one of the major challenges was I wasn't aware really of what my role would look like in industry, because I didn't have the opportunity to really mentor or shadow anybody within industry. And so it was very challenging for me to kind of project and predict whether or not my skills were appropriate for the role that I would take on. And once I entered the pharmaceutical industry, sort of blindly in a way, I began to realize just how well I had been trained in order for me to carry out my role. And I really credit my mentors back in pharmacy school and across my fellowship, who provided me with the exact opportunities that I would need for me to be able to thrive in my current role. So I want to go back and echo a point that you made, Leslie Ann, about how important it is to find a postdoctoral position with a mentor that really understands where you want to go in your career and what experiences you need to be able to get there. Because for me, I entirely relied upon those experiences to propel me forward, and they've been invaluable.
This was great. I want to just sort of, again, just echo two big things. Dr. Fagali, you mentioned being uncomfortable, and it's being comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think those are things that help to propel our careers. So I hope that, the trainees that are listening are aware that for the most part, I feel like I'm always uncomfortable in my setting, but this is how I learn, and this is how we grow. So just be okay with being uncomfortable. And then Priya, the other thing that you had mentioned was sort of not knowing what your career may look like, right? I have found that there are so many roles that haven't been created yet, right? So I think you all have to be prepared to maybe create that role for yourself, know what you want it to look like, and be okay with it maybe not being available now, but that's something that maybe you could sort of create for yourself. Looking in the chat, I don't see any questions just yet. Oh,
I just had a question for Priya. You mentioned that you didn't have an opportunity to know what it would be like to work in industry. Are there opportunities with Pfizer or elsewhere for trainees to shadow someone like you?
That's a really great question. And I've been working very hard in my role now to do that. In addition to all of my day-to-day activities in my programs, I've been trying to develop more of an outreach network, because I do feel this is such a challenge. And speaking from personal experience, that's the best way, I think, to kind of forge new opportunities. So there are a number of fellowships that are being sort of created across, affiliated with different universities. There's also the opportunity for internships. I know internships are generally targeted towards those that are in a PhD level, but there's absolutely no reason why a fellow can't apply to that type of role, especially if one doesn't have the experiences in industry. It's entirely valuable. So we're really looking to kind of create those opportunities and use the ones that already exist. And I always say, I'm available to speak to people. If anyone has questions, feel free to drop me an email. I'm happy to have a quick chat or send an email back and offer my perspectives. But it is something that we're really working on, and we're developing a number of different fellowship opportunities for people to come in and participate and learn what it's like to work within the pharmaceutical industry and to use the skills that you've learned across your fellowship to be able to apply them.
That's great. Thanks.
Dr. Fagali, would you also maybe speak to any opportunities? I don't know if there's shadowing or opportunities just for trainees to maybe just get a little glimpse of what you do, or and maybe how you sort of tackled your K, because I think that's one of the biggest things is how to approach grant writing. Is there any opportunities with you?
Yeah, so I will speak to our own experience because of the collaborative relationship between Dr. Van Kateranat and Dr. Kritas, who both come from different worlds. We always try to have cross collaboration happening between the fellows. And so I know that a lot of the postdoctoral fellows we've encouraged to come and shadow our some time, or spend some time within the clinical setting to try to understand if there are biological samples that we're working with, what the source is, what the setting is, how things work around, so that if they are developing their own ideas, they recognize the feasibility of getting certain samples or the complexity of getting certain samples and making sure to address that. And then from the point of view of grant writing, I mean, I spent a lot of time, again, learning a new language of writing a grant. When I had been trained for a while to write scientific writing when it comes to scientific articles is very objective and dry and very removed. And grant writing is is a very active voice, and is very much related to marketing and being able to recognize who your audience is and trying to guess or think about what questions they're going to be asking themselves and almost preemptively answering those questions. And so I spent a lot of time writing smaller grants internally, looking for smaller grant opportunities within the foundations that were focused on pregnancy work and foundations within Pittsburgh that were focused on early career support, and trying to use those as ways of getting feedback and then using that feedback and reintegrating that into larger grants. And so I took a very iterative approach of starting off with a T32, ending up with an internal K, and then from there building on the individual K, because of recognizing that it was an exercise that I had to go through and a learning process I had to go through in order to become, because of how competitive the grant cycles are. And so I try to be patient with the process and try to build on the research experience and at the same time build on the complexity of each grant by learning from the prior grant that I had written.
Wonderful. These are all such great pearls. I'm hoping that our trainees are sort of jotting these down, because I know I'm making mental notes now. I just wanted to just switch gears just a little bit, because I know we touched on sort of the mentor importance, but maybe we could kind of revisit that, because I think oftentimes we think mentor, it needs just to be for like the trainee or the initial stages. But what I found is important is that you have a mentor sort of throughout your entire career span, right? I remember my PI saying, "Oh, I have a meeting with my mentor," and I'm thinking this guy who's been, a PI for the last 30 plus years, you're discussing this with your mentor. So it really resonated with me that you need to continue a mentorship relationship throughout your career. So I guess a question for you all is, how do you find a good mentor? And, what questions would you ask to determine how to find a good mentor, particularly in the sort of career development space?
I can start, Leslie, and I think that's such a great question, because you're absolutely right. Seeking mentorship doesn't stop when you graduate from your programs and you move forward. It's a lifelong pursuit, and you always need someone in your court, so to speak, who's helping you out. For me, I actually went directly to my managers. Within the structure of the pharmaceutical industry, especially in a company like Pfizer, which is very large, we have somewhat of a tiered structure. And so there are individuals who've been there for a lot longer than I have been there. And I simply reach out to them and ask them questions. I have my direct report manager, but I also have other individuals in the department who have complementary skill sets. And so I speak to them and ask them, what would they do to get the experiences that I'm seeking? And also vice versa. I offer them skills that I have that maybe others in the department don't have. And I offer to share that with everybody. And in that capacity, I've actually started a training series with a couple of colleagues of mine to be able to provide training for individuals on pharmacometrics within the department. And so I think it works both ways, but I think really just seeking out others who speak to you and who understand and are jive with you in terms of your personality and your interests really makes a big difference. And I think that's also important in the selection process of where you want to work. I think that it's important to find individuals who are similar to you in terms of personality, drive, and interest. And when you find those individuals and you end up working in an environment with them, every single day, talking to any one of them feels like you're being mentored by any one of them. And so I think that finding that right fit makes a big difference. And not all jobs are identical to each other, because the people that occupy them are not always the same. So I think those would be my two pearls of wisdom that I would offer in regards to mentorship, for continued mentorship.
Yeah, and I would probably add to have a very open mind and not to expect that a single individual is going to serve multiple purposes. And you are hopefully going to build a group of mentors that will serve different functions in the same way that friends can serve different functions, or you can have different interests with different friends. And to try to think of essentially a group of mentors as trying to be complementary to each other and trying to always think, based on what your interests are and what you would like to do, what piece of mentorship is missing within that pie to help you be successful, whether it's someone in your corner who's able to understand kind of a lot of times what I struggled with, my mentors were extremely well established and sometimes had a little bit of a harder time recognizing how to get things going from the ground up. And so to have younger individuals who had just started their mid-career stage, who still had a recollection of the struggles of early career settling, and who were more familiar with the changing environment in academia compared to when my mentors had started off, who could be that voice of support during mentoring meetings, who could provide that guidance beyond what my two main mentors could do. Was very helpful. And to always have a balance, to try not to have a content balance, to have an age balance, to have a gender balance, to try to make it so that you are as well-rounded as you can be, so that you can be as successful as you need to be. Having different opinions sometimes can lead to you having to navigate uncomfortable conversations, but it can also help you understand that there are different ways for trajectories and for projects to go, and to try to build your confidence in deciding what you want to do as you get more experience and that you gain more independence. And that can sometimes, again, start off with being very uncomfortable and feeling like you're caught in the middle between your mentors, but it's in recognizing that everybody has a different opinion and everybody has their own way of thinking about things, and there is no right or wrong path, and there is no right or wrong trajectory, and it's a matter of choosing what fits you best. And mentors will understand that even after the uncomfortable conversations. You can go back and say, this was not an easy thing to do, and I appreciate everyone for bringing in their very strong opinions and being so engaged within this conversation. And I will take everybody's advice to heart and let you know what I choose. And I hope that you'll be able to support me with the choice that I make, and come back with, this is why I've chosen this path forward, and hope that everybody will stay on. And mentors usually sign on with a specific interest of supporting their mentees. And so oftentimes, even if things are a little bit different, they understand that they're essentially the trunk of the tree, and that you are an offshoot, you are a branch, and you are going to branch away. You're going to depart a little bit from what their foundation is. That's the reality. And they don't get to control exactly the complete direction in which you go in. They understand that, even if that step sometimes can be difficult.
I'm so glad you mentioned that branching, because sometimes you may, I don't want to lose a mentor, but sometimes it's run its course, right? It served its purpose, and that's okay too. So just keep that in mind. Yeah. So I have one comment in the chat from Kevin Watt. It's just other thoughts on identifying mentor. And I think this is great advice to ask their previous mentees about their mentorship experience and look at their mentors' publications to see where their mentees are on the masthead. Oh, this is perfect, because sometimes you may be able to identify red flags before you're in that situation. So be sure to maybe reach out to their mentees and ask about their experiences with any potential mentors. So I think, wow, this has been such a great discussion. I wanted to, move on to another question, but I realized we've kind of run out of time. So if you both would be willing to maybe follow up with some questions offline. I feel like a lot of times trainees are maybe a little afraid to ask questions in such a big forum. So if you all do have any questions for any of us, please feel free to reach out and email directly. Thank you both, Dr. Jayachandran and Dr. Fagali. I really appreciate your being here and participating today. We really just are so grateful for you all imparting these sort of words of wisdom.
Of course, it is a pleasure, and we all started there in the beginning. Nobody got to being a little bit further without starting in an early career state.
Thanks for the opportunity, and please don't be shy about reaching out with questions. Happy to answer.
Great, thank you. All right, so Sarah, I will turn it back over to you. Sorry for going a little bit over.
No problem. Thank you, Leslie. Melissa and Priya, was an excellent discussion. And, I love the idea of looking outside of the lab and some traditional opportunities for clinical pharmacologists to other opportunities. So